Okay, sorry about that. There was a glitch and I had to stop recording. I needed you guys to underline the Korean War, and as I was stressing in the previous recording, the same, it almost appears that the same parameters are set up for the Chinese Civil War were taking place in Korea. And again, we can just look at this map and we can see an issue of proximity here. Um, Ultimately, China becomes communistic, and by way of proximity, this spreads to North Korea. Japan had occupied North Korea during World War II, and now that Japan was defeated, many nations that were under occupation, just like China and and Korea, were questioning their allegiance to the notion of capitalism and Western ideologies. So another civil war will take place in Korea, in which the northern part of Korea will be led by communistic ideologies, and powers that be in the southern part of Korea will uh, ultimately seek assistance. And based on the U.S. policy of containment defined under the Truman Doctrine, we will be in a position to respond. So the United States will um, position soldiers in South Korea to protect communism from spreading and taking over all of the country. This situation was under the leadership of General Douglas MacArthur, and under his leadership, we will see that American troops were successful in containing communism and stopping it from growing. But he was also able to understand that many of the um, casualties of war were not even North Korean. They weren't Korean at all. That many of them were Chinese, and that led MacArthur and his understanding of the war, uh, or his belief that his understanding of the war should expand. That we should no longer simply be containing communism. We should probably go on the offensive, and then of course offensively attack China because it appears that they are undermining the American presence in South Korea, and they are contributing to the North Korean fight. So MacArthur says, "Man, we need to nip this in the bud. Let's drop an atomic weapon on China." The president of the United States is Truman, who has already dropped a bomb and is already beginning to understand the severity of that. Begins to stress to MacArthur that that's out of the question. Don't even bring that up. We'll have problems if you do. MacArthur continues to talk about this and bring it up, and ultimately Truman has to remove MacArthur from office. This is this is definitely a hiccup in the presidency of Truman, where much of America sees him as a beloved, iconic, living legend type of general, and Truman said that we have to part ways with this guy because he's too problematic, he's too aggressive, and he doesn't understand the possibility of World War III is at hand. So we go back to Truman's policy of containment, and when it was all said and done, uh, the war will end in a 3 years later at the 38th parallel, which is also known as the DMZ, which stands for the Demilitarized Zone. So I'm going to type that there, DMZ. Um, and an armistice will be signed, but no formal peace treaty has ever been established between North Korea and South Korea uh, to this very day. Both nations are technically still at war with each other and geared up for that type of conflict. You can see on the next picture here, this is the DMZ right there. Like, whoops, the DMZ is right there. This side represented by North Korea, that side represented by U.S. trained and led South Korean troops. This is a banner in North Korea, and you can see that the bayonet and the rifle itself are red, and they are impaling um, two two men. But the first man that they impale happens to be an American force, and on the back of that American force are the South Koreans. From the perspective of North Korea, they look at their ability to stand up to the United States as their American Revolution, if you will, like the same way that we look at 1776, the same way that we look at we stood up against the greatest greatest empire in the world, the British, in 1776, and declare our independence and ultimately become free. The North Koreans look at their accomplishment in 1953 as just as that. They even look at South Koreans as not necessarily a problem, but more like a misguided brother who fell under the magical spell of American capitalism. But ultimately, both sides want to reunite, the North under a communistic regime, the South under a democratic regime, and so they're still at odds with each other. When it's all said and done, the Korean War is often remembered, ironically enough, often remembered as the Forgotten War. We ended up losing 33,000 U.S. lives. 3 million Asian lives are lost because there were Chinese and Koreans involved. But the Korean War made it very clear that this Cold War was not a European affair, that the Cold War was a global issue, and that the United States would have to be ready and willing to respond to any issue at hand. One thing that the Korean War also teaches us is that this might be our first example of, I don't want to say defeat, but it's considered an issue at the very least, because we didn't necessarily win. Well, one could make the argument we did win. If we were following the policies of Truman, we did contain communism, so we did win. For the American people, it's not seen as a victory. When you look at it in the grand scheme of things, we started in 1950. We had 0 losses of life. We spent no money in the conflict. It is now 1953. We have 33,000 lives lost. Yes, we have contained communism, which means that nothing has changed in that regard over 3 years, but at the cost of 33,000 lives, at the cost of billions, maybe trillions of dollars, the American people are not going to be able to stomach that. So the Korean War at times is seen as America's first loss at war in the 20th century. Now, one thing I do want to talk about Truman's presidency is his dedication to the civil rights agenda. He reached out in unprecedented ways to the nation's black community. He creates a commission on civil rights. He calls upon Congress to create a civil rights commission and make it federal, make it permanent, pass national laws against lynching, eliminate the poll tax. He wants to ensure equal access to jobs and education. So it appears that Truman has the luxury to be a Democratic progressive president, but just because he is that way doesn't mean the rest of the nation is. Just because he is that way doesn't mean Congress is going to be on board. One of the measures that Truman will suggest, and so what that should tell you is that much of Congress is still racist. They are a bit reflective of the time and the American people at the time. There were still some concerns and problems with the notion of equality of the races. Now, the presidency does have executive options, and so therefore President Truman in 1948 will issue the Executive Order 9981, and this will desegregate the armed forces. As Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, that is one area of the government that he is able to have control over to a great degree. And in regards to national security, he believes that this could be the largest institution in American life to promote racial integration. And if it is successful there, it could be a great example for the rest of America to follow. When you look at the U.S. military, they are the perfect, in science, they have a test group or a test sample that when not exposed to other variables you can run experiments on. You can make an argument that the U.S. military is the perfect test group, or guinea pigs, if you will, when dealing with these type of issues. And we find out that when they integrated the military, the U.S. military, there were no major problems at hand. And the Korean War will actually be the first war since the American Revolution where we had integrated armies or militias, if you will. So Executive Order 9981 is an example of progressivism under Truman's presidency, and will stand as a launch pad or a stepping stone to a greater civil rights movement. Please underline Dixiecrats. Dixiecrats are a combination of Democrats who are from the South, and they cannot stand President Truman. Why? Because Truman believes in equality. So these are Democrats. Truman's a Democrat, but these are Southern racist Democrats, and they say to themselves, "We can't, live in a world where Truman believes in racial equality. We're going to create a new party. We're going to call ourselves the States' Rights Democratic Party." And their number one platform is for the complete segregation of the races. So that's their number one concern as a party. They're from the South, they are Democrats, and they are bothered by individuals like Harry S. Truman, who's running for re-election. Now, when they run for office, Dixiecrats will not win. You could expect that if the Dixiecrats were to break off from the Democratic Party, you would think that the Republican Party would win. And that's usually what happens with third-party candidates, as we were taught earlier this semester. But in this particular case, and you can see from this picture here, President Truman is holding up a copy of the Chicago Daily Tribune, and many of journalists were predicting that Dewey would defeat Truman because of this split in the party. But in reality, what we take away from Dixiecrats is when they lost at the federal level, they had many serious questions to consider. Do we go back into the Democratic Party and try to get them to see our ways, understand our ways, or do we simply leave forever the Democratic Party and find a home elsewhere? And the elsewhere could only be the Republican Party, because if they remain a third party or a part of the third party, then they could never win at national level elections, particularly presidential elections. So what you're going to see here from here on out, that Dixiecrats will set a wave or a trend that will take place in the southern parts of these United States, and that many of these southern states will begin to flip from the Democratic Party to what we now know to be the new Republican Party. And these individuals who used to be old school Southern Democrats who were racially charged, believing in the position of states' rights as the Confederate States of America had done before them, we can see that there will be a shift, that these old school racist Southerners are going to be today's new school Republican, a Republican base. And many of their concerns are stressed collectively today in the notion that the government is too large, there are racial issues that need to be addressed, things of that nature. So this is where you begin to see the political shift. Right around 1948, you'll see much of the South turn Republican. Now, please underline the Rosenberg trial. And in this trial, we are going to see hysteria at its best. We had two individuals who were investigated by various agencies. One of them was obviously the FBI. Another would be the House of Un-American Activities Committee. And they were investigating the influence of communism in various sectors of our society. The most infamous for HUAC would have been the Hollywood 10, because the film industry is fairly influential as a source of media and entertainment. But the Rose trial was national. It was a national discussion on this issue. We had these two individuals that were overt communists living in America, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. They were of Jewish descent. They were living in the United States, and they were charged with conspiracy. And the most damning charge would be the notion that they were giving atomic or nuclear sensitive materials and information to the Soviet Unions, to the Soviet Union, so that they could create an atomic weapon. During the trial, the judge will call their crime worse than murder, that this couple had helped cause the Korean War, because ultimately our efforts were restricted because we knew the Soviet Union to now contain, or I should say, have access to a military weapon. and in 1953, they both will be executed. And when you look at these pictures and the hysteria that surrounded this particular case was that when you looked at them, they didn't look like spies. They didn't look like individuals that were seeking to overthrow the government or disrupt the government, causing chaos and bring the collapse of American society at large. They look like your average uncle, your average aunt, the guy that lived next door, the woman who lived next door. I mean, they look like ordinary Americans. And that scared other Americans because that now means that, yo, you don't know who could be a possible spy. You don't know who could be a terrorist. You don't know who's working for the other side as an agent, as a double agent. Like, what is going on in the world? And so now everybody is suspicious of everyone. And when you look at the evidence of the case, or if you ever study the case itself, much of it was based on a lot of hearsay, circumstantial evidence, and the nation was torn. Half of America was damning them as terrorists and they should be put to death. The other half of America was saying, yo, I think we're acting out of pocket. We're probably taking this thing too far. We might need to slow down. But nonetheless, their deaths will trigger a feeling across the United States of uneasiness about how we saw our neighbors. Please underline McCarthyism. And one thing I want to get established off top is that McCarthyism is an attitude. Like it was a feeling or a period of existence where paranoia. Oh, am I spelling that right? I don't think so. Oh well. Where a system of or a period of paranoia will exist, and it's labeled after this senator named Joseph McCarthy. Now he runs for real. He's running on an anti-communist campaign, and that's definitely where he has rooted his base. So in an effort to kind of drum up that base, McCarthy begins a series of hearings where he will suggest having evidence of spies in our American government with communistic ties, and he is going to expose all of these individuals in an upcoming hearing. Well, and let's just say he was to do this like on Friday, then it takes place all weekend. People are speculating this, people are making accusations about that, people are beginning to point the finger here and there, and it just creates this witch hunt where, man, anybody, I mean, if you had any type of communistic sympathies, you could be labeled as un-American and your livelihood could be taken away from you. Your life could be threatened if you were not towing the hard American line of democracy, capitalism, and the American way. Well, ultimately, when he held this meeting and he started leveling these accusations, we began to realize, like, wait a minute, this stuff isn't making any kind of sense, and he begins to look foolish. And then there's an investigation against him where he starts to look like a madman. When it was all said and done, when you look at this period, this era, or this attitude, this atmosphere that McCarthy established, it definitely exposed America's character, that we were scared, and that in our fear, we created an opportunity for individuals to abuse our sensibilities, to abuse our liberties, to abuse power in the name of anti-communism. That we were finding people guilty by association, finding people guilty by sympathy. We were assassinating individuals' character. We were making it difficult for people to exist, again, simply because of a possibility. And we cannot afford to live in a world where it's possible that an individual can do this crime, so therefore I'm going to hold them in a position of life where as if they had committed that crime. We simply cannot do that unless we have hard evidence to suggest that there was a motive, that they actually committed the crime. We have to give, at the very least, we pretend to believe that people are innocent until proven guilty. It'd be nice if we gave people the benefit of the doubt. During these odd times and these strange times, America is scared and we are acting upon fear. And so in this atmosphere of fear, some states are going to require loyalty oaths of teachers, pharmacists. They're going to ban communists from holding driver's license, and that we were fearful that these individuals would influence others to consume communistic concepts, especially teachers. The idea that we're influencing and have the ability to influence minds and fill them with information that could be threatening. If anything, we're trying to get people to think for themselves, and ultimately they can make decisions for themselves as well. It goes even further that the local anti-communist groups will be established, and they would force libraries to remove un-American books. There's even some like Dr. Seuss books that were removed from libraries because they promoted the notion of a utopian communistic society, kind of, in some instances. I mean, it was just a bunch of ridiculous things, but that's how far our fear was taking control of our everyday lives. Now, the FBI would utilize and abuse power in the name of anti-communism. They would compile files on political dissenters, homosexuals, and others. Anybody they had a problem with, who they had a problem with them, and it may not have anything to do with communism. Let's say they had a problem with them because they were Democrats. Let's say they had a problem with them because they were Republican. Well, openly, go after these individuals in that capacity. But what you could do is say, well, no. Now we're going to go after them because they're communists, or we believe them to be communists, and then capture them in that sense. One example would be if you guys had an opportunity to watch that docu-series on Netflix called Tiger King. Look, when they ultimately arrested him and charged him with, I guess, this plot to murder some woman, they understood, the state understood, the powers that be understood that those charges were sketchy at best. But in that investigation of those charges, they were able to uncover other issues, and then those were the heavier levied charges that brought on this and brought on that. And so, we get to play those type of games. But the ultimate thing I want you guys to take away from this slide is this bullet point right here. And the irony in this point is that the anti-communist crusade promoted a new definition of loyalty, and that new definition of loyalty is conformity. And this is interesting and ironic because Americans, especially capitalists and individuals that believe in liberty, justice, and equality, the reason we're supposed to hate communism is because they promote a system of conformity. But yet, if you don't conform to the American way, they're going to hate you just as much, label you as a problem and a threat just as much. And the very thing that we are hating the communists doing, brainwashing a society and making them all conform to a particular way. It appears that if we don't do that here in America as well, then we are subject to the mob, to the hysteria, and that's just as problematic. We will look at the 1950s as a decade of conformity, and that's when I skip in the 1950s, and we'll jump right into the 1960s for the most part. But in this decade, this will be the generation after World War II. We have a young generation growing up in the 1950s, and this is a decade in which everybody really is trying to be the same, because heaven forbid you stick out just a bit. That would be a justification for someone to come down on you hard. Look at societies like that today, and there are some issues that need to be addressed for sure. There's a Japanese problem, or this belief that the nail that sticks out is the nail that gets hammered in. There is no room for individuality. It's all about tradition and culture. And it appears that the United States is definitely edging towards that concept at the conclusion of, or I'm sorry, at the beginning of the 1950s. But either way, we'll end that chapter with that. Hope you guys enjoyed the lecture. See you guys next time.